Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. This is Mark Z, filling in for the unbelievably talented Jeffrey Davis, and my co-host is the even more talented Mark Furman, who is the sponsor at Tarlow, Breed, Hart & Rogers. Mark, thanks for being here.
Mark, it's great to be with you, and I'm very excited to hear from our next guest.
Excellent. Mark, do you want to introduce our next guest?
Yes, our next guest is Peter Farrell. He's an attorney at Tamkin Hochberg in Newton, and welcome.
Thanks, Mark, for both of you having me, and Mark, thanks to you and Tarlow, Hart, Breed, Rogers for hosting and having me, and great to see you both.
Thank you very much, Pete. Pete, you are very interesting because you're an established litigator, but in an area where specialization has become very, very important in specific areas of need, you've really carved out a niche. And can you tell our viewers, and our radio audience about your practice, not only obviously about the litigation piece, but the piece in the educational space that you're involved in?
Sure, thanks. So my passion is litigation. It always has been, but I also have used those skills to develop an area of expertise in special education law, and in particular representing families and only families of kids that have special education needs, that have disabilities, that need additional support in school. Particularly those that are on individualized education plans and 504 plans, which is 504 is a provision of the federal law, and that allows these students to get the services that they need. So sometimes there is conflict that arises in that, and that's where I come in. And when parents need a little bit more advocacy than they ordinarily would be able to do on their own.
You know what I find interesting is that your area, though, it's not just what you do. It's increasingly important because families in this generation want their children that have special needs to be part of their life. They're not just put in a special place for special needs kids. Right,
and it's very, very important that inclusion is the word. Inclusion and having students learn in the same environment or in the same fashion as the other children are learning, because these students want to be a part of that community more than anything. And studies have shown and experience has shown that when the students are included literally in the classroom with those other students, they're learning as much from their environment as they are learning from, say, speech services or behavioral services or occupational therapy and things of that nature, because it's really development of the whole person is what we're looking for. And oftentimes the opposite of inclusion is what we call substantially separate, which has its challenges, but where there are kids that have significant needs, that is appropriate in some circumstances. So inclusion is the way to go if you can do it. Otherwise, we look for other alternatives for these kids.
So what happens when there's a disagreement between a school system and the parents about what's an appropriate services to be provided for a student?
Right. It's a great question, Mark. I think, when there's a disagreement, first, we always try to work it out informally. And typically that involves, it could be as simple as a telephone call. Oftentimes, though, we as lawyers, you generate anytime a school district hears that there's a lawyer involved, the first thing they're going to do is bring in their lawyer, which is sometimes good, because then you can, not beat around the bush, be very direct and say to the lawyer, look, this is where I think the issues are, and hone right in on it. But what happens when there's conflict is oftentimes, I actually heard from the Bureau of Special Education Appeals handles in litigation these types of complaints. And I heard someone from the Bureau speak 2 weeks ago, and I asked a question, what is the top 5 things that drive you crazy? And in this context, he was a mediator. And he said the indifference by some in the district towards parents. And I think that when there's conflict, we really, on both sides, need to keep the train on the track and realize that these are children, and trying to check heavy personalities at the door and resolve it in that fashion. So What happens when there's conflict? First thing, we try to resolve it. If we can't resolve it, or if the school district is being bullheaded, as they sometimes are, they get a demand letter, and then they get the clinical evidence and the records and all the services that these children have been receiving to show that they're making effective progress in school, accessing the curriculum appropriately. And then if we still can't resolve it, then we file a complaint. In an administrative sense, it goes to the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, which for the listeners and viewers is a state agency that hears these things. And if it doesn't work out there, these are federal court claims. So it can get fairly serious and escalate if you get to that point.
At the state agency, are there independent administrative law judges
Yes.
who decide these
Yes. So
cases?
these are long-time hearing officers that have been there for quite some time. The good news in that vein is they have a long track record, and I have, as many people do that are in this area of the law. There's, I belong to a service that I get the opinions, and I can look up how that particular hearing officer ruled on a particular issue, or I get the digest that gives you quarterly what the hot cases are. And, a lot of the hot cases lately have been really emotional needs of students, especially in the middle to high school age range, where they're having a lot of difficulty between school refusal, significant, some of them unfortunately expressing wanting to hurt themselves. And those are very serious cases that require serious attention. And oftentimes the answer by the school district is, well, we don't see that at school. But mom and dad, of course, see that at home. So trying to bridge the gap is sometimes difficult, but these students need everybody who's on their team, their teachers. That's a big part. Their teacher and educators and guidance counselors and school psychologists and everybody. Those are huge parts of these young people's lives that they need to be aware of everything going on, and it's the parents' job, and in some cases my job, to try to bridge that where they may claim that they're not aware.
Yeah. To what extent is, does limited resources of the school system play in some of these disputes? I mean, are some of the solutions for kids involve the district spending money, and might be some pressure on them to not spend money?
Right. So that's always a concern and a very good question. And often times that is the central issue. We all know on both sides that that's the central issue. But for the school district to come right out and say, well, we don't have the money or we don't have the staff, those cases are layups for me. Because one, it's unlawful. Okay, the federal law, you have to understand, under the Individual Disabilities and Education Act, says shall. It's, you have to provide a free and appropriate public education. Okay, the emphasis being on F, free. And the joke in our world is the F word, which free. Here, because that is a key point, and there's many cases that talk about the scope of what the acronym is FAPE, F-A-P-E. They can never say that we don't have the money or the staff. The issue becomes when a student, particularly in the out-of-district placement context, these schools that are available, they're called Chapter 766 schools. They are available for students. The tuition is scheduled by the state budget office. So you see you can predict what the tuition or the approved tuition is going to be for this year. So there's, this isn't you could talk all day about municipal finance, and it's a complicated way that it works, but school districts have built into their budget. There's a way to make it work. There are ways to make settlements work. I guess answering your question and trying to get directly into the point, there's a case out there, Champa versus Weston Public Schools. You can request all the school district settlement agreements and have the identifying information redacted so you can see the money that was spent. And in some cases, it's eye-popping in how those cases were resolved. So it's an issue. The school district can't say it, but we know that that's always a concern.
What about, Pete, I've heard of situations where kids get tested by a school system and their determined not to have special needs, and then the parents arrange a testing privately
Right.
that they pay for, and a special need is identified that hasn't been identified by the school system. Do you see those kind of cases?
I
or-
do see those cases. They do come up frequently. Really, what it boils down to, Mark, is it's not always a battle of the experts. The school district has an obligation to evaluate in every area of suspected disability. So if they don't catch or evaluate, say, do a full-blown psychological evaluation and catch a behavioral issue, and then there's a neuropsych evaluation that identifies a behavioral issue, whether it's ADHD, whether it's autism, some other process going on. That's something that once you submit that in independent evaluation, the school district really is obligated to reconvene the team and make have some conversations about that and hopefully change the program.
This is great that, you're focused in this area, Pete. It's really important work, and
Thank you.
children are the future, right?
I was the parent. I'm the parent of an autistic daughter. That's how I got into it. So it's my passion and what drives me. So thanks again for having me today, guys. I
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much, Pete, for coming in and talking about your specialty. As Mark said, it's just wonderful work, and it's become so crucial today, especially as families are looking for inclusion. If families or individuals want to be in touch with you, how could they best reach you?
The best way is to reach me at the office at Tamkin and Hochberg in Newton Corner. We're right off the Mass Pike. We have our website, tamkinhochberg.com, or you can give me a call at 617-964-2501, and I'd be happy to talk to you.
Excellent. Again, we're talking to Pete Farrell, attorney at Tamkin and Hochberg. Pete, again, thank you for appearing on our show today. We are radio entrepreneurs, and we will be back after a few minutes.
Thanks again.